New Libertarian Manifesto by Samuel Edward Konkin III. Read by John Lothe. Preface to the first edition. The basic form of New Libertarianism arose during my struggle with the Libertarian Party during its formation in 1973, and counter-economics was first put forward to the public at the Free Enterprise Forum in Los Angeles in February 1974. New Libertarianism has been propagated within and without the Libertarian movement, and its journals, most notably New Libertarian Magazine, since then. More importantly, the activism prescribed herein, especially counter-economics, has been practiced by the author and his closest allies since 1975. Several anarcho-villages of new libertarians have formed and reformed. Just once, wouldn't you like to read a manifesto that's been practiced before it's been preached? I wanted to, and I did. Signed, Samuel Edward Konkin III, October 1980. Preface to the second edition. An agorist publication ought to be judged most severely in the free marketplace. Sure enough, the first edition of New Libertarian Manifesto has been sold out, and the second edition, taken up by a fresh entrepreneur looking for profit with his ideology, is with you, the reader. The market's judgment, to my pleasant surprise, is that the New Libertarian movement is the most successful of my many publications. In the realm of ideas, 2 years is a fairly short time. Nevertheless, attacks on the New Libertarian movement have begun in left-center libertarian publications, and on one such student network newsletter berated errant chapters for switching allegiance to that flake Konkin only last month. Essays and articles on counter-economics and agorism appear in more and more non-left or non-agorist yet libertarian publications. A truly encouraging sign is the emergence of many counter-economic entrepreneurs in the Southern California area, and a few scattered around North America and even Europe, who embrace and distribute the New Libertarian movement. An agorist industrial park has been condensing quietly in Orange County between these two editions. This continuing gratification is not idly enjoyed. It has inspired the author to continue the dialogue in 2 issues of the theoretical journal based on the New Libertarian movement. The writing of counter-economics, see footnote 3, chapter 3, and the planning of a theoretical magnus opus, as Das Kapital was to the Communist Manifesto, undoubtedly to be titled Agorism. As for continuing to practice what I preach and expanding on the practice, I may add to the end of the first preface, and I am still doing it. Signed, Samuel Edward Konkin III, 1983. Statism, our condition. We are coerced by our fellow human beings. Since they have the ability to choose to do otherwise, our condition need not be thus. Coercion is immoral, inefficient, and unnecessary for human life and fulfillment. Those who wish to be supine as their neighbors prey on them are free to so choose. This manifesto is for those who choose otherwise, to fight back. To combat coercion, one must understand it. More importantly, one must understand what one is fighting for as much as what one is fighting against. Blind reaction goes in all directions negative to the source of oppression and disperses opportunity. Pursuit of a common goal focuses the opponents and allows formation of coherent strategy and tactics. Diffuse coercion is optimally handled by local, immediate self-defense. Though the market may develop larger-scale businesses for protection and restoration, random threats of violence can only be dealt with by removing the roots of mysticism and delusions planted deep in the victim's thinking. This requires a grand strategy and a cataclysmic point of historical singularity: revolution. Such an institution of coercion, centralizing immorality, directing theft and murder, and coordinating oppression on a scale inconceivable by random criminality exists. It is the mob of mobs, gang of gangs, conspiracy of conspiracies. It has murdered more people in a few recent years than all the deaths in history before that time. It has stolen in a few recent years more than all the wealth produced in history to that time. It has diluted, for its survival, more minds in a few recent years than all the irrationality of history to that time. Our enemy, the state. In the 20th century alone, war has murdered more than all previous deaths. Taxes and inflation have stolen more than all wealth previously produced. And the political lies, propaganda, and above all, education, have twisted more minds than all the superstition prior. Yet, through all the deliberate confusion and obfuscation, the thread of reason has developed fibers of resistance to be woven into the rope of execution for the state. Libertarianism. Where the state divides and conquers its opposition, libertarianism unites and liberates. Where the state beclouds, libertarianism clarifies. Where the state conceals, libertarianism uncovers. Where the state pardons, libertarianism accuses. Libertarianism elaborates an entire philosophy from one simple premise. Initiatory violence, or its threat, coercion, is wrong, immoral, evil, bad, supremely impractical, etc., and is forbidden, nothing else. Libertarianism, as developed to this point, discovered the problem and defined the solution. The state versus the market. The market is the sum of all voluntary human action. If one acts non-coercively, one is part of the market. Thus did economics become part of libertarianism. Libertarianism investigated the nature of man to explain his rights deriving from non-coercion. It immediately followed that man, woman, child, Martian, etc., had an absolute right to this life and other property, and no other. Thus did objective philosophy become part of libertarianism. Libertarianism asked why society was not libertarian now and found the state, its ruling class, its camouflage, and the heroic historians striving to reveal the truth. Thus did revisionist history become part of libertarianism. Psychology, especially as developed by Thomas Szasz as counter-psychology, was embraced by libertarians, seeking to free themselves from both state restraint and self-imprisonment. Seeking an art form to express the horror potential of the state and extrapolate the many possibilities of liberty, libertarianism found science fiction already in the field. From the political, economic, philosophical, psychological, historical, and artistic realms, the partisans of liberty saw a whole, integrating their resistance with others elsewhere, and they came together as their consciousness became aware. Thus did libertarians become a movement. The libertarian movement looked around and saw the challenge. Everywhere, our enemy, the state, from the ocean's depth past arid outposts to the lunar surface, in every land, people, tribe, nation, and individual mind. Some sought immediate alliance with other opponents of the power elite to overthrow the state's present rulers. Some sought immediate confrontation with the state's agents. Some pursued collaboration with those in power who offered less oppression for votes. And some dug in for long-term enlightenment of the populace to build and develop the movement. Everywhere, a libertarian alliance of activists sprang up. The state's higher circles were not about to yield their plunder and restore property to their victims at the first sign of opposition. The first counterattack came from anti-principles already planted by the corrupt intellectual caste: defeatism, retreatism, minarchy, collaborationism, gradualism, monocentrism, and reformism, including accepting state office to improve statism. All of these anti-principles, deviations, heresies, self-destructive contradictory tenets, etc., will be dealt with later. Worst of all is partiarchy, the anti-concept of pursuing libertarian ends through statist means, especially political parties. A libertarian party was the second counterattack of the state unleashed on the fledgling libertarians, first as a ludicrous oxymoron, then as an invading army. The third counterattack was an attempt by one of the 10 richest capitalists in the United States to buy the major libertarian institutions, not just the party, and run the movement as other plutocrats run all the other political parties in capitalist states. The degree of success those statist counterattacks had in corrupting libertarianism led to a splintering of the movement's left and the despairing paralyzation of others. As disillusionment grew with libertarianism, the disillusioned sought answers to this new problem, the state within as well as the state without. How do we avoid being used by the state and its power elite? That is, they asked, how can we avoid deviations from the path of liberty when we know there are more than one? The market has many paths of production and consumption of a product, and none are perfectly predictable. So even if one tells us how to get from here, statism, to there, liberty, how do we know that's the best way? Already some are dredging up the old strategies of movements long dead with other goals. New paths are indeed being offered, back to the state. Betrayal, inadvertent or planned, continues. It need not. While no one can predict the sequence of steps which will unerringly achieve a free society for free-willed individuals, one can eliminate in one slash all those which will not advance liberty, and applying the principles of the market unwaveringly will map out a terrain to travel. There is no one way, one straight-line graph to liberty, to be sure, but there is a family of graphs, a space filled with lines, which will take the libertarian to his goal of the free society, and that space can be described. Once the goal is fixed and the paths discovered, only the action of the individual to go from here to there remains. Above all else, this manifesto calls for that action. Agorism, our goal. The basic principle which leads a libertarian from statism to his free society is the same which the founders of libertarianism used to discover the theory itself. That principle is consistency. Thus, the consistent application of the theory of libertarianism to every action the individual libertarian takes creates the libertarian society. Many thinkers have expressed the need for consistency between means and ends, and not all were libertarians. Ironically, many statists have claimed inconsistency between laudable ends and contemptible means. Yet when their true ends of greater power and oppression were understood, their means are found to be quite consistent. It is part of the statist mystique to confuse the necessity of ends-means consistency. It is thus the most crucial activity of the libertarian theorist to expose inconsistencies. Many theorists have done so admirably, but we have attempted, where most failed, to describe the consistent means and ends combination of libertarianism. Whether or not this manifesto is itself correct can be determined by the same principle. If consistency fails, then all within is meaningless. In fact, language is then gibberish and existence a fraud. This cannot be overemphasized. Should an inconsistency be discovered in these pages, then the consistent reformulation is new libertarianism, not what has been found in error. New libertarianism, or agorism, cannot be discredited without liberty or reality, or both, being discredited, only an incorrect formulation. Let us begin by citing our goal. What does a free society look like, or at least a society as free as we can hope to achieve with our present understanding? Undoubtedly, the freest society yet envisioned is that of Robert Lefebvre. All relations between people are voluntary exchanges, a free market. No one will injure another or trespass in any way. Of course, a lot more than statism would need to be eliminated from individual consciousness for his society to exist. Most damaging of all to this perfectly free society is its lack of a mechanism of correction. All it takes is a handful of practitioners of coercion who enjoy their ill-gotten plunder in enough company to sustain them, and freedom is dead. Even if all are living free, one bite of the apple, one throwback, reading old history or rediscovering evil on his own, will unfree the perfect society. The next best thing to a free society is the Libertarian Society. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, so say Thomas Jefferson, and it may be possible to have a small number of individuals in the marketplace ready to defend against sporadic aggression, or large numbers may retain sufficient knowledge and ability to use that knowledge of basic self-defense to deter random attacks, the coercer never knowing who might be well versed in defense, and eliminate the profitability of systematic violence initiation. Even so, there remain two problems inordinately difficult for this system of anarchy with spontaneous defense. First is the problem of defending those who are noticeably defenseless. This can be reduced by advanced technology to people who are quadriplegic morons, assuming that won't be solved by sufficient technology, and very young children who require constant attention anyways. Then there are those who for a brief time go defenseless, and the even rarer cases of those who are overwhelmed by violence initiators wishing to test their skills against a probably weaker foe. The last is most rare simply because of the high risk and low material return on investment. Those who need not and should not be defended are those who consciously choose not to be. Pacifists. Lefebvre and his disciples need never fear some libertarian will use methods they find repugnant to defend them. Perhaps they can wear a dove button for quick recognitions. Far more important is what to do with the violence initiators after defense. The case in which one's property is violated successfully and one is not there to protect it comes readily to mind. And finally, though actually a special case of the above, is the possibility of fraud and other forms of contract violation. These cases may be settled by the primitive shootout, or socially, that is, through the intervention of a third party who has no vested interest in either of the two parties to the dispute. This case is the fundamental problem of society. Any attempts to force a solution against the wishes to both parties violates libertarian principles. So a shootout involving no risk to third parties is acceptable, but hardly profitable or efficient, or even civilized, that is, aesthetically pleasing, save to a few cultists. The solution then requires a judge, fair witness, or arbitrator. Once an arbitrator to a dispute, or judge of an aggression has performed judgment and communicated the decision, enforcement may be required. Pacifists may choose arbitration without enforcement, by the way. The following market system has been proposed by Rothbard, Linda, and Morris Tannehill, and others. It need not be definitive and may be improved by advances in theory and technology, as this author has already done. At this stage of history, it seems optimal and is presented here as the beginning working model. First, always leaving out those who choose not to participate, one insures oneself against aggression or theft. One can even assign a value to one's life in case of murder or inadvertent manslaughter, which may range from the taking of the violence initiator's life to taking replaceable organs, technology willing, to restore life, or the payment to a foundation to continue one's life's work. What is crucial here is that the victim assigns the value to his life, body, and property before the mishap. Exchangeable goods may simply be replaced at market rate. See below. Individual A finds property missing and reports it to the insurance company, Insurance Company A. Insurance Company A, either through another division or through a separate detective agency, D, investigates. Insurance Company A promptly replaces the object to A, so that loss of use and good is minimized. Detective Agency D now may fail to discover the missing property. In that case, the loss to Insurance Company A is covered by the premiums paid for the insurance. Note well that in order to keep premiums low and competitive, Insurance Company A has a strong incentive to maximize retrieval of stolen or lost goods. One could wax eloquent for volumes on the lack of such incentive for monopoly detection systems such as state police forces and their horrendous social cost. If Detective Agency D does discover the goods, say, in B's possession, and B freely returns them, perhaps induced by reward, the case is closed. Only if B claims property right in the object also claimed by A does conflict arise. B has Insurance Company IB, which may perform its own independent investigation and convince Insurance Company A that Detective Agency D erred. Failing that, Insurance Company A and Insurance Company B are now in conflict. At this point, the standard objections to market anarchy have been brought up that the war between A and B has been enlarged to include large insurance companies, which may have sizable protection divisions or contracts with protection companies, Protection Company A and Protection Company B. But wherein lies the incentive for Insurance Company A and Insurance Company B to use violence and destroy not only its competitors' assets, but surely at least some of its own? They have even less incentive in a market society long established. The companies have specialists and capital tied up in defense. Any company investigating an offense would become highly suspect and surely lose customers in a predominantly libertarian society, which is what is under discussion. Very cheaply and profitably, Insurance Company A and Insurance Company B can simply pay an arbitration company to settle the dispute, presenting their respective claims and evidence. If B has rightful claim, Insurance Company A drops the case, taking its small loss, compared to war, and has excellent incentive to improve its investigation. If A has rightful claim, the reverse is now true for Insurance Company B. Only at this point, when the matter has been fully contested, investigated, and judged, and still B refuses to relinquish the stolen property, would violence occur. B may have only been bothered so far as being notified of Insurance Company B's defense on B's behalf, and B may have chosen to ignore it. No subpoena could be issued until after conviction. But Protection Company B and Insurance Company B step aside, and B must now face a competent, efficient team of specialists in recovery of stolen property. Even if B is near mad in his resistance at this point, he would probably be neutralized with minimum fuss by a market agency eager for a good public image and more customers, including B himself someday. Above all, Protection Company A must act so as not to invoke anyone else or harm others' property. B, or Insurance Company B, is now liable for restoration. This can be divided into three parts: restitution, time preference, and apprehension. Restitution is the return of the original good or its market equivalent. This could be applied even to parts of the human body or the value set on one's life. Time preference is the restitution of the time use loss and is easily determined by the market rate of interest which Insurance Company A had to pay to immediately restore A's property. Apprehension is the sum of the cost of investigation, detection, arbitration, and enforcement. Note how well the market works to give B a high incentive to restore the loot quickly to minimize apprehension cost, exactly the opposite to most status systems, and to minimize interest accrued. Finally, note all the built-in incentives for swift, efficient justice and restoration with a minimum of fuss and violence. Contrast this with all other systems in operation. Note as well that in parts, all of this system has been tried successfully throughout history. Only the whole is new and exclusive to libertarian theory. This model of restoration has been spelled out so specifically, even though it may be improved and developed, because it solves the only social problem involving any violence whatsoever. The rest of this libertarian society can be best pictured by imaginative science fiction authors with a good grounding in praxology, a term used by Mises for the study of human action, especially, but not only, economics. Some hallmarks of this society, libertarian in theory and free market in practice, called agoras, come from the Greek agora, meaning open marketplace, are rapid innovations in science, technology, communication, transportation, production, and distribution. A complementary case can be made for rapid innovation and development in the arts and humanities to keep up with the more material progress. Also, such non-material progress would be likely because of total liberty in all forms of non-violent artistic expression and ever more rapid and complete communication of it to willing recipients. The libertarian literature extolling these benefits of freedom is already a large body and growing rapidly. One must conclude this description of restoration theory by dealing with some of the arcane objections to it. Most of these reduce to challenges to ascribing value to violated goods or persons. Letting the impersonal market and the victim decide seems most fair to both victim and aggressor. The latter point offends some who feel punishment is required for evil in thought. Reversibility of deed is not enough for them. Though none of them has come up with a moral basis for punishment, Rothbard and David Friedman, in particular, argue for the economic necessity of deterrence. They argue that any percentage of apprehension less than 100% allows a small probability of success. Hence, a rational criminal may choose to take the risk for his gain. Thus, additional deterrence must be added in the form of punishment. That this also will decrease the incentive for the aggressor to turn himself in, and thus lower further the rate of apprehension, is not considered. Or perhaps the punishment is to be escalated at ever faster rates to beat the accelerating rate of evasion. As this is written, the lowest rate of evasion from state-defined crimes is 80%. Most criminals have better than 90% chance of not being caught. This is within a punishment rehabilitation system where no restoration occurs, the victim being further plundered by taxation to support the penal system, and the market is banished. Small wonder there is a thriving red market in non-state violence initiation. Even so, this criticism of agorist restoration fails to note that there is an entropy factor. The potential aggressor must put the gain of the object of theft against the loss of the object plus interest plus apprehension cost. It is true that if he turns himself in immediately, the latter two are minimal. But so are the costs to the victim and insurer. Not only is agorist restoration happily deterrent in a reciprocal relation with compliance, but the market cost of the apprehension factor allows a precise, quantifiable measurement of the social cost of coercion in society. No other proposed system known to this time does that. As most libertarians have been saying, freedom works. Nowhere in agorist restoration theory do the thoughts of the aggressor enter into the picture. The aggressor is assumed only to be a human actor and responsible for his actions. Furthermore, what business is it of anyone else what anyone thinks? What is relevant is what the aggressor does. Thought is not action. In thought, at least, anarchy remains absolute. If you sit up in shock to find I have crashed through your picture window, and then made sure everyone will continue to live, you don't particularly care if I tripped and fell through while walking by, or if I engaged in some act of irrational anger jumping through, or even whether it was a premeditated plan to distract protectors across the street from noticing a bank heist. What you want is your window back pronto, and the mess cleared. What I think is irrelevant to your restoration. In fact, it can be easily demonstrated that even the smallest expenditure of energy on this subject is pure waste. Motivation, or suspected motivation, which is all we can know, may be relevant to detection and even to prove plausibility of the aggressor's action to an arbitrator if there may be two equally probable suspects. But all that matters for justice, as a libertarian sees it, is that the victim has been restored to a condition as identical as possible to pre-harm. Let God or conscience punish guilty thoughts. Another objection raised concerns what will be done about violence initiators who have paid their debt to the individual, not society, and are free to try again with greater experience. What about recidivism, so prevalent in status society? Of course, once one is marked as an aggressor, one will probably be watched more closely and thought of first when a similar crime is committed. And while work camps may be used to repay restitution in a few extreme cases, most aggressors will be allowed to work in relative freedom on bond. Thus, no institutions of criminal higher learning, like prisons, will be around to educate and encourage aggression. The distinguishing characteristic of a highly efficient and accurate system of judgment and protection will be that it will occupy a negligible fraction of an individual's time, thought, or money. One can then argue that we have not portrayed 99% of the agorist society at all. What about elimination of self-destruction, which libertarianism does not deal with? Space exploration and colonization, life extension, intelligence increase, interpersonal relations, and aesthetic variations. All that really can and need be said is that where present, man must spend half or more of his time and energy serving or resisting the state. That time and energy, physicist's definition of action, will be usable for all other aspects of self-improvement and harnessing of nature. It takes a cynical view of humanity indeed to imagine anything but a richer, happier society. This, then, is a sketch of our goal and detailed picture, or enlarged focus on the aspect of justice and protection. We have the here and the there. Now for the path. Counter-economics.